With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halverson, and joining me again this morning is Lorrie Boyer. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing today, Lorrie?
I am doing great. Did you have a good holiday?
I had a fantastic holiday. How about you?
Yes, it's always a good time. You know, these farmers, they feed us well, don't they?
They sure do. They do. And I love that, we ran a story last week about how our Thanksgiving dinner comes from just all over the nation. And I really love that. I love that we're getting, just an example in one meal of how farmers all over the U.S. are feeding us in their various ways.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So we wanted to talk this morning. We've got so much going on in the nation right now with agriculture, especially with the new administration coming in. And so I was thinking that we could chat a little bit about what we're kind of expecting. And, we have an idea because this will be President-elect Trump's second term. So we have an idea of from his first term, kind of what we can expect. But we also know that with President Trump, that you never really can know what to expect completely. But you and I have both been talking with a lot of experts and getting their thoughts as well. I know that you've been chatting with a lot of people. One thing that's top of mind for everybody is tariffs. And what will the president do about tariffs? What are you hearing, Lorrie?
Well, most of the major ag groups, both grains and livestock, actually have a lot of optimism with President-elect Trump coming back into office. I think that from just a general consensus of what I've been talking about, they had a fairly good relationship with President-elect and his administration the last time he was in office, and there were a lot of good things that happened. And it sounds like he is very pro-ag, and he wants to hear from farmers and ranchers. And just a little side note, I personally know a farmer here in the area that got a surprise invitation to come and sit down with Trump and his staff and just talk grassroots ag last time he was in office. So that would lead me to believe that he is actually listening and wanting to engage with farmers. But to your point about tariffs, this is something that actually I think most of our ag groups are caught off just a little bit of surprise on the numbers that he has thrown out as far as tariffs. Now, we know that he doesn't want production. He doesn't want manufacturing done in other countries. He is totally against illegal immigrants flowing into the country and is also wanting to support our local industry and to control the drugs that are coming in. Therefore, he has proposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. And during his election speeches, he talked about putting a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, but now he's talking more about a 10% tariff, which is quite a difference. But either way, there's a lot of concern because this will affect agriculture. There was a trade war last time, Sabrina, and actually I had to do a little digging to recall this, but there was some indemnities that were paid out back in 2018 and 2019 because of the tariff war to the agriculture industry. So that could happen again. And so there's a little bit of concern over that. And also, does this in fact breach the USMCA, the US-Canada Mexico Free Trade Agreement? There's question over that as well.
Right. And which is really interesting because the USMCA was, first negotiated during President Trump's first term in office. His administration was a big part in that. And then, yes, what we're hearing now about what he may do with tariffs could, in fact, go against the very trade deal that he worked so hard to negotiate. So that's very interesting. I wish that I could see inside the mind behind that and wonder, like, is he seeing things that he, or his team seeing things that they did not want originally with the USMCA? Is it not working out how they planned? Do they think things could be better? Or is this, like you were pointing out, he's very focused on illegal immigration. He's very focused on drugs. He's very focused on having things manufactured in the US. So is the vision for that taking over the original vision for trade with our closest neighbors?
And to your point, even more interesting is he will actually be renegotiating that USMCA in 2026. So that really makes for an interesting scenario on what's going on here.
It sure does. I'm fascinating. For one thing, I feel really lucky that people like you and I get to be so active in covering it, because it's going to be just fascinating to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you brought up also the illegal immigration. I know that that is something that our California farmers are also keeping an eye on, not so much because of illegal immigrants, but because of legal immigrants who are here working could also get caught up in this, and that could cause a big problem for California's agriculture, which relies so much on our workforce. If we don't have labor, we've seen it many times because of problems getting enough labor, where fruit is just left to rot because there's not the humans to harvest that. So another topic that everybody is watching really closely.
Yes, for sure. And I know that during his last administration, he did acknowledge a H-2A program. I
Mhm.
don't think they got very far on that, but I would imagine with all of these things talking about illegal immigrants and ag workforce and things like that, I imagine this will come up for him again. And I do know that there's also some litigation going on whether or not the Department of Labor has some of the authority that they have been using with that program. So you got that going on in the background as well.
That's right. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about some of the things that we think we'll see. Again, who knows, but we'll be right back. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. So what kind of challenges could farmers face when transitioning from traditional nitrogen-based fertilizers to humate-based solutions?
That's the fun part about this is the humates and humic acids, while they are certified organic products, the interesting part is most of the users are conventional users. They continue to use their conventional practices, and they are adding them to supplement and help retain that nutrient and make it last longer. So you're using them similar to how you would a urease inhibitor or other products. You're adding them to your current application without much change.
There was research that showed humates can decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. Can you tell me more about that research?
Yeah, so it does vary by soil type and texture. And so I think farmers should look at that research and say, okay, will I get 30%? And that's going to vary by soil type and texture. Qualify that with your soil type and make sure that it's relative to your operation.
And then beyond emission reductions, how do humates enhance soil vitality and structure, looking long term for the agricultural production?
Farmers talk about soil organic matter, and that's where the conversation ends. We got low soil organic matter, and they really don't dive into what the components of soil organic matter are. Soil organic matter has two pools. You have an active pool and a passive pool, and the active pool being those components that are being actively degraded by soil microbes. And you also have the passive pool, which is the leftovers. Those the organic acids have been degraded by microbes and are stable and are no longer susceptible to degradation. In that pool, you find humic acids, fulvic acids, and humin. And that's the deposits that we mine. So these are ancient plant deposits that are fully degraded. Humates are contributing to your passive fraction of your soil organic matter, which does a few things for your soil. Improves soil texture, which impacts water conservation, nutrient retention, and in addition to it just loosening up the soil and aiding roots to penetrate the soil better, getting access to more air, oxygen, and water.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Welcome back. Sabrina Halverson here, chatting with Lorrie Boyer. I'm my new co-host. So excited to have you here. Welcome once again.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So we're chatting this morning about a few things that we may be able to expect from the Trump administration when he is inaugurated in January. One thing that I found to be very interesting was his pick for Ag Secretary. First off, I just have to say that I'm excited that we're going to have our second ever female Ag Secretary, the first being Ann Veneman from California. I'm still very proud of her. But so Brooke Rollins is President-elect Trump's pick for Ag Secretary. She grew up in a small agricultural town in Texas. I think it was called Glen Rose, and has a bit of a background in ag, but mostly in policy, which ag policy just extremely important to our farmers.
I wanted to point out too, when you said the second female, as a matter of fact, his two top picks are both female. Kelly Loeffler
Yeah.
was also in the running there. And a lot of the ag groups I visited with, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, really thought that
Mhm.
she had it. And so when he came out with Brooke Rollins names last Saturday, or about a week ago, I guess I should say, I think it took everyone by surprise. I'm not really familiar with her. Are you?
I'm not. I'm not very familiar with her. I know a little bit about from when she was in the previous Trump administration, and but not a whole lot. And I don't know a lot about her ag background. I do know that she was raised, like I said, in the farming community. She was really involved in FFA and 4-H. She does have an ag degree from Texas A&M. And then from there, though, I think she got more involved in policy rather than agriculture. I do know that she's been very involved in the American First Policy Institute, which was launched in 2021. Now, from what I understand, that was kind of a once President Trump was no longer in office, it was the goal of this nonprofit was to continue the policies that he had wanted. So they continued kind of working on that. And she is the leader of that organization. So again, very policy focused. Policy very important to agriculture. So I think that could be a benefit.
I have to admit, I was not familiar with American First Policy Institute either. I've looked that up and I
Mhm.
need to go back and read it a little bit more in depth. But yeah, from what you're saying, very policy focused. I also did not know that she had served in President-elect Trump's previous administration. So I had to look that up as well. And she was the acting director of the United States Domestic Policy Council. So
Right.
she seems to have the qualifications needed, don't you think?
I do. I do. I think that it will be important to have somebody in the ag department who really understands policy because policy, I feel, is extremely important to our ag because I mean, everything in government, of course, revolves around policy. So having somebody in there who has been so involved in creating policy, in helping implement policies, I think that's going to be important because our farmers really need somebody who understands how all of these different government policies are affecting them in their daily lives, which is what it comes down to. I mean, the government can enact all the policies it wants. What matters is how are these policies going to affect our farmers in their daily lives in running their businesses day by day? And we have a lot on the books right now that are so detrimental to farmers. We've got so many regulations that really stand in the way of of good farming. And so hopefully having somebody in the office that can help balance that out, I think would be very beneficial.
I think one other tidbit about her that I like personally, and I think will benefit the farming industry, like you're talking about, is in her background, she also served as an ethics advisor to Texas Governor Rick Perry. Ethics
Nice.
in government, yay.
Right. I did not know that. Thank you for pointing out. And yeah, that's well, I very strongly believe in ethics. And so that's fantastic to have somebody that is willing to stand up for some ethics, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, so now we're just waiting on her confirmation and hopefully that will move forward.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see everything that's going to go on from here. We've got another month before, or month and a half, I guess, before anything actually will start happening, before the inauguration even takes place. But as we're getting more and more word in about different picks for positions and the ever-changing tariffs situation, it's kind of a wild ride, but it's really an interesting one to be on, I would say.
I totally agree with you.
All right. So coming up in the show today, you and I both will be doing interview segments. Yours is coming up next. I'm excited to hear what you've got going on for the day. I will be back after your interview segment with mine. And once again, I just want to say welcome again for your first week on the show. And thanks for being my co-host.
Thank you, Sabrina. Have a great day.
All right. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. She's Lorrie Boyer, and we will be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Boyer.
I am visiting with Karl McDermott. He is the Chief Service Officer for California-based DeltaTrak. We'll be talking about DeltaTrak and what they do here shortly. But Karl, to get us started, tell me about yourself and your background.
You might have guessed I'm a Brit. I've been living actually in Mexico for 30 plus years. So left the UK in my kind of mid-20s looking for a sense of adventure. Landed up running a business for what's now called Accenture in Mexico. and liked it so much I've stayed. So I guess my optic is very much North American. I've spent pretty much all my life in technology. So, started doing enterprise solutions, spent 10 years doing strategy and innovation projects, and the last 15 or so have been logistics or supply chain. So I was EVP for a last mile logistics company with 5,000 employees, then run a TMS solution, a transport management solution in the cloud, for a couple of years. Went to a Canadian freight tech company based out of Toronto for 6 years, and recently joined DeltaTrak. That was back in April of this year. So I've been in the company like 8 months or so.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful. What is DeltaTrak? Tell me more about this company.
Yeah, DeltaTrak's a pioneer of what we call cold chain logistics. Our founder and CEO, Fred Wu, started out this business basically doing temperature recorders, right? The simple devices that help producer growers understand what's happened in the supply chain from when they packed it into the container or on a truck, all the way through until it arrived to their either the supplier or the receiver. And Fred started that 35 years ago. Obviously, we've seen a lot of innovation since then. We've seen the digital thermometers come on, which are USB, which again makes it easier to capture the data. I would say that the big change in the industry was 6 years ago, Lorrie, when we saw the convergence of real-time data coming off the cell network. So you've got devices that connect over the cell network and provide all this temperature, humidity, shock, light data in real time, so that we can proactively manage the shipment, not just wait to the end of the journey to see what's happened. That was great for the pandemic, because I think the three big questions of the pandemic generally were, where's my produce? When's it going to arrive? And has it arrived in good condition? So the fact that we had these real-time trackers or real-time rockers really helped, some of your customers or your audience really track their produce through the supply chain. My job then is to take all the data we have and then layer in services that make sense for everyone in that supply chain, from the smaller producer growers who maybe want to get insurance. So we work with a great partner called Marsh, the world's largest insurance broker, to give them a way to protect their loads, really simply using a transactional shipment by shipment policy. We also work with a company called Bloom's. They do factoring. So again, smaller producer growers want to get their capital, working capital back into the organization quicker. We can do, factoring, which is a great lever for, helping grow businesses. We help with documentation, inspections, QA, all the way through to what I would call the consumer realm, which is QR codes, right? How do we bring consumers into the world of understanding all the hard work our producer growers do in terms of creating great and nutritional products, getting their feedback, proving provenance, farm to fork. I think these are some of the terms that are important now for many consumer demographics who are worried about sourcing, and then how those producers move through the supply chain. So that's a little bit about what we do at DeltaTrak, and then what specifically the UPQ network is, which is to enable all these services with data.
Karl, what are some of the commodities that are included in a cold chain?
A great question, Lorrie. So I think we can split it up into maybe 2 or 3 macro commodities. So you've got everything in produce, and produce is one of the biggest challenges for cold chain, because at the end of the day, a lot of those producers is actually, they're living elements. They're still ripening. If it's avocados, there's still kind of respiration happening from when they were actually picked in the field and packed, cooled, sent through the supply chain, all the way through to the receiver, at their distribution centers, and then, onto the stores and into the hands of the consumer. So, I think that one of the biggest segments that we work with, and obviously that whole produce supply chain, so it's avocados, it's all the berries, it's apples, pears, stone fruit, anything around I would say fresh fruit and vegetables that need some kind of tracking within the supply chain. So that's one area of cold chain. Another one will obviously be protein. So again, anything around the protein. So it could be beef, cattle, chickens, seafood. That's another key area, I think, of cold chain. And the final one would be certain, consumer goods, right? Which again needs to be managed. I mean, the one that always comes to mind is ice cream. And obviously, what people want again is, great produce or great protein or great ice cream when it eventually gets delivered and they buy it and they, consuming it at home. So those would be some of the biggest, I would say, macro categories of the whole cold chain segment, specifically as it relates to agri-food.
I'm talking here today with Karl McDermott, Chief Service Officer for DeltaTrak, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back as I continue my conversation here today with Karl McDermott, Chief Services Officer for DeltaTrak. Karl, what are some of the current trends that we are experiencing in the produce industry and the cold chain logistics industry?
One of the most talked about trends, at least for the last 2 years, was FSMA 204. And the FSMA 204 regulations were basically set up to improve food safety in the United States. It's a fairly robust set of legislation which basically allows us to create what's called a sortable spreadsheet in 24 hours to identify sources of foodborne illness. So basically having this sortable spreadsheet means that, the authorities can help direct a recall and maybe not create and direct the recall to the actual source of the problem without creating food waste in any kind of adjacent categories or adjacent farms that weren't affected. So that's a key piece of legislation that I think is helping provide a more robust, a more secure, if you like, supply chain, but really focuses on food safety as much as anything else. There are others, obviously, which are critical. You've just had some elections in the United States. So California has some very robust legislation around carbon emissions. Okay, again, that's maybe impacting large organizations as it is today. But a lot of your audience, your producer growers are going to have to start to create some kind of simple carbon accounting if they're working with large Californian companies or organizations who do business in California, just to provide the carbon emissions for, the farming and then the supply chain. Because you've had elections, I'm not sure how the national or federal level is going to play out. And that's probably one of the discussion points that we can have today, Lorrie, is, given that there's, that you have a new president elect, what does that mean for the produce sector? But I would say FSMA 204, that's the biggest piece of legislation in produce specifically. It affects seafood as well. But also the carbon emissions in general is, something that it's a reporting requirement in California. There is some good anecdotal evidence and good science-based evidence that, it is creating fires in California. It does displace, producer grows from a specific region, and it's moving them elsewhere where they, may be less susceptible to, drought or other climate-based risks.
As we head into the new year, what are some trends that you would expect to see?
That's a great question. So if you remember, I've been living in Mexico for 30 plus years. So Super Bowl's coming up. I think it's, if I'm correct, I'm just going to have to look at this, 9th of February. So literally there's 20 days between the incoming president being sworn in and the Super Bowl. You've heard about, and I think it's really posturing in other areas, but you've heard about some of the geopolitics around the tariffs that were going to be enforced, right? So again, I think this was done in very good meaning. It's basically trying to address some of those imbalances in trade, specifically, from countries that, have maybe not done, or not done, played by the rule book, right, if you like. So it's more maybe orientated towards China. But across the board tariffs will also kind of drive up the cost of food. Remember, the US imports a lot of the produce. It's coming obviously from Salinas Valley, from Florida, from other parts of the US, but a lot of it's coming from countries like Mexico. So one of the first things will happen if there's tariffs across the board is you'll see, again, probably an uptick in prices. I'm not saying it's going to put the Super Bowl guacamole at risk, at least not for next year, but you'll see it in that those prices start to drift upwards if there is a 10% tariff. So that's something that we should be wary of because it really goes about, food security and the food supply chain, which in North America is very well integrated. Now, the flip side of that is the US exports a lot of grains and a lot of protein products to Mexico. So if there's some retaliatory measures, obviously then, the companies that are at risk there are the producers for those particular protein categories. So again, I think we need to be very careful not to overstep the mark, direct the tariffs, for the right purposes, without basically, bringing additional costs into the supply chain that's going to be felt by consumers, in their daily or weekly basket.
Anything else to add here today?
Another, I would say, plank of the US elections was immigration. And again, I think there's some very good reasons to have, security of your border. If you remember, Brexit, was the UK leaving the European Union. A lot of that was basically fought around, the problem of immigration. Now, again, in the agricultural world, there is what's called the agricultural visa, right? I think it's called, I'm just looking at the data here, H2A, temporary visa for agricultural workers. Now, if we need to find the right balance of, do we have enough workers to basically pick the produce in the US farms? And I go back to Salinas Valley, the languages you hear there are mostly, not exclusively, but Spanish speakers, because that's who's doing a lot of the picking. So again, the immigration side and the deportations, there, we have to be very careful there to make sure that there's enough workers in the US farms in order to do the picking. And that was one of the big issues in the UK. The European workers that were actually doing the work of picking all went home, and the UK had to kind of find out new or alternative sources of labor. Obviously, mechanization, and you probably heard about automation, might help that. But still, picking those, avocados to make them, the best quality avocados, and those berries, there is a little bit of manual work there. So I think, immigrations and the visa situation's one. And the final one I just wanted to round off today is around where I think maybe the business world is heading. I think, again, what we're hearing is, there's going to be a strong focus on building national champions. Okay, again, there's some positive parts to that. However, what it might do is create concentration in the retail sector. So again, there's a merger plan for, Kroger and Albertsons. If that goes through, you'll see, more concentration of buyer power. This has already happened in Canada, for example. And buyer power, again, tends to push prices down, which means that the producer growers, those small companies, are going to feel the pain. They might not be able to kind of, adapt to the new pricing structures that, some of these larger organizations are going to put on them.
Once again, my guest today, Karl McDermott, Chief Service Officer with DeltaTrak.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
This week is Healthy Soils Week, and so we're joined for this segment by Paul Lum, who is the Senior Agricultural Specialist for the American Farmland Trust in the California region. Paul, let's start out by telling me a little bit about American Farmland Trust to get us started.
Yes. So American Farmland Trust was established in 1980. It's a national agricultural nonprofit. A bit of its early focus was helping protect farmland through agricultural conservation easements. It's a national organization based in 6 regions throughout the U.S., of which California is one of the 6 regions. The other 6 regions are Northeast, Pacific, Northwest, Texas, Kentucky, Illinois, Ohio. And around 5-6 years ago, American Farmland Trust expanded its focus to include advocacy, adoption, and research for regenerative practices on farm, helping farmers adopt practices that help land and the environment and the ecology around their lands, soil health, water quality, a lot of awareness to help farmers and to help all of us fight climate change. So as I think at this time, American Farmland we have the 2 missions: protecting farmland and improving the farming practices, improving farm practices.
And as you mentioned, you are in the California area. So are there any projects in California that you can tell us about? And tell us a little bit about what American Farmland Trust does in the state.
Okay. Yes. A large part of our focus for California is the San Joaquin Valley. And the reason is this is an area that is impacted by drought and, and decreasing groundwater supplies, which of course groundwater is the lifeblood for growing crops in many areas of the San Joaquin Valley, starting with Stanislaus County and going south to Fresno County. So that's a large focus, helping farmers in those areas grow their crops profitably and with crop vibrancy despite declining water supplies. Other areas that we are working in are the South Coast, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria area, and a new area for us is the Inland Empire, the Riverside area. Occasionally, we do work on the Central Coast, so Salinas, Monterey, and I have a small project in Napa County.
So, talking about Healthy Soils Week, what are some of the things going on for Healthy Soils Week?
Healthy soils are found to improve nutrient availability, improve water availability, infiltration, and improve soil biology and organic matter. And all of those things help crops grow with fewer chemical inputs. It's a sustainable system that ultimately that the biological activity, the nutrient availability sustains itself over many years and therefore allows farmers to decrease pesticide application, fertilizer application, healthy soils, improve water retention, decrease erosion, so decreases compaction. And then the key with healthy soils is carbon sequestration, holding carbon in the soil, decreasing carbon release into the atmosphere. So through the biological activity, through a lot of soil organic matter, holding that in the soil and turning that organic matter into nutrients. Just that the carbon sequestration helps fight climate change, in addition to helping conserve water and making nutrients more available to crops. So yes, a lot of efforts throughout the country to bring about awareness that the benefit and value to practices that improve soil. And thus that's what we call Healthy Soils Week. Just having that focus, that 1 week where we're going to get the word out that a healthy soil is our goal for us in farming.
So, for farmers who are listening who would like to know more about what kind of practices they can use, what would you tell them?
Oh, okay. Just benefiting their crops, improving the soil health, improving the biological diversity in their soils, is going to improve the vitality and vigor and production of their crops, improve their economic bottom line through just sustaining soil through nutrients, improve water retention, therefore reducing costs for fertilizers, for water, for pesticides, and through the improved the crop production, resulting in better profitability throughout years and years of growing crops. And also fighting climate change. While you are on your land, you're actively fighting climate change, which helps all of us, including the land on the farm.
And is there a website where people can get more information?
Yes, there are. The American Farmland Trust national website provides a lot of information, and American Farmland Trust California.
And that website again is farmland.org, where you can find the American Farmland Trust. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we'll be back in just a moment. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. So what kind of challenges could farmers face when transitioning from traditional nitrogen-based fertilizers to humate-based solutions?
That's the fun part about this is the humates and humic acids, while they are certified organic products, the interesting part is most of the users are conventional users. They continue to use their conventional practices and they are adding them to supplement and help retain that nutrient and make it last longer. So you're using them similar to how you would a urease inhibitor or other products. You're adding them to your current application without much change.
There was research that showed humates can decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. Can you tell me more about that research?
Yeah, so it does vary by soil type and texture. And so I think farmers should look at that research and say, okay, will I get 30%? And that's going to vary by soil type and texture. Qualify that with your soil type and make sure that it's relative to your operation.
And then beyond emission reductions, how do humates enhance soil vitality and structure, looking long term for the agricultural production?
Farmers talk about soil organic matter, and that's where the conversation ends. We got low soil organic matter, and they really don't dive into what components of soil organic matter are. Soil organic matter has two pools. You have an active pool and a passive pool, and the active pool being those components that are being actively degraded by soil microbes. And you also have the passive pool, which is the leftovers, those the organic acids that have been degraded by microbes and are stable and are no longer susceptible to degradation. In that pool, you find humic acids, fulvic acids, and humin. And that's the deposits that we mine. So these are ancient plant deposits that are fully degraded. Humates are contributing to your passive fraction of your soil organic matter, which does a few things for your soil. Improves soil texture, which impacts water conservation, nutrient retention, and in addition to it just loosening up the soil and aiding roots to penetrate the soil better, getting access to more air, oxygen, and water.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're going to wrap up the day with a little bit of news. Questions remain after the latest USDA cattle feedlot report. Here's Gary Crawford.
What story does last week's USDA Cattle on Feed report give us?
The main story that we see right now is that placements are still very strong, despite the fact that cattle inventories are relatively tight.
USDA livestock analyst Michael McConnell says producers continued to place more animals into feedlots during October, 5% more than October a year ago.
It appears that strong prices for feeder cattle as well as strong demand for beef is continuing to encourage producers to place their cattle in feedlots and have them fed out for beef production.
And like they say in the detective shows, follow the money. That's what Michael and his team are doing.
The key price that we look at within our committee is the Oklahoma City price for feeder cattle between 750 and 800 pounds. In the month of October, that price averaged about $254 per hundredweight. That's about 4% higher than what it was last year. And last year's prices were pretty high as well.
Yes, they were. So producers appear to be continuing to place more cattle into feedlots, leading analysts to surmise
there's essentially a smaller pool of animals to draw from for both the purposes of placing animals into feedlots and being fed out for fed beef production, as well as the pool of cows available for breeding.
Now, remember, we already started 2024 with what Michael says was
the smallest total inventories that we've had for decades.
So that begs the question,
how many more head of cattle are there outside of feedlots, still out on pasture, basically ready to come for placements into the feedlots?
Well, we're going to have to wait until the end of January for the answer to that and a lot of related questions. That's when USDA puts out its major cattle inventory report.
And that will basically provide an estimate of the total cattle inventories in the United States as of January 1. We'll also get a breakdown of different classes of cattle, how many cows are estimated out in the country, how many cows for beef production purposes versus how many cows for dairy production purposes, how many heifers are being retained for replacement for both beef and dairy, as well as the 2024 calf crop will be our first opportunity to get a hard number on how many calves were born during 2024.
USDA will spend most of January gathering data for this report, which will be released January 31st. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
A federal judge has issued an injunction against the Biden administration's expanded protections for farmers in the U.S. under the H-2A program. The injunction, which was issued by a U.S. district judge in Kentucky, applies to Ohio, West Virginia, Alabama, and Kentucky. Plaintiffs in the case argued that the Department of Labor rules would allow foreign workers to unionize. The American Farm Bureau and partners also were issued a preliminary injunction by the U.S. District Court in Mississippi, preventing the DOL from enforcing its workers' protection rule. AFBF President Zippy Duvall says farmers appreciate the men and women who choose to work for their farms, and they take seriously the responsibility of ensuring a safe workplace. But he goes on to say, while workers should be treated fairly and respectfully, we also believe the DOL rule was overly broad to the point of being unlawful. The AFBF's lawsuit was the first to stop key aspect of the rule for all farmers. As the record-shattering hurricane season ends, AccuWeather experts estimate that 5 hurricanes and 1 unnamed tropical storm that made landfall in the U.S. caused an estimated $500 billion in total damage and economic loss. Chief Meteorologist John Porter says the 2024 hurricane season was explosive and will be remembered for shattering records and causing approximately $500 billion in total damage. For perspective, this would equate to almost 2% of the nation's gross domestic product. More than 230 deaths have been directly linked to the tropical storm and hurricane impacts in the U.S. this year. AccuWeather's estimates include impacts like long-term medical costs, job and wage losses, crop losses, infrastructure damage, business and supply chain disruptions, and many other impacts that most projections don't account for. Hurricane Helene was the most costly, as AccuWeather's damage and economic loss estimate in the United States was between $225 and $250 billion. That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halverson on behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself. Thank you for tuning in.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.